Hello, good evening, and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Beginning today, join me live every evening at 6 p.m. and we shall discuss and cover all the important chapters of this beautiful book, which is a textbook in political science for class 11th titled Indian Constitution at Work. We shall cover 8 important chapters in this fashion. In 8 lectures, we hope to cover all the important chapters of this NCERT book. After this is over, then we will take up another textbook in political science titled Political Theory. And we shall cover important lectures of that book as well. And once that is done, we will cover landmark judgments of the Supreme Court relevant for the Civil Services examination. Should you wish to attend these sessions, all you need to do is subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the like button, drop in your comments. Since this is a new initiative, we need your encouragement, we need your support. After you have attended this session, you will be in a position to understand and answer these previous year's questions, asked in 2023, 2020, 2014 as well. NCERT books are the most important source of knowledge and information for the Civil Services examination. Not only is the content of these books authentic, but UPSC has been directly asking questions from these NCERTs. If you are following these lectures from end to end, I promise you don't need to read these NCERTs on your own. And we will not just cover NCERTs, we will cover the basic concepts related to the information which is provided in these NCERTs. Should you wish to download the PDF that I am using for this lecture, you can get in touch with me on my Telegram channel. The link to join my Telegram channel is provided in the video description as well as in the pinned comment. And you can download this PDF from my channel. So let's get started and look at why do we need a constitution? This chapter, why and how, is the first chapter that we shall be discussing today. Now listen to me carefully. You are living in India, but you're not living alone. Look around and there are others as well. You are part of a large group, but this large group is also diverse. Diverse in the sense, there are people belonging to different religious communities. There are people coming from different social backgrounds. There are people coming from different economic backgrounds. There are people who are following different professions. There are people who are young and old, poor and who are economically well served. And don't you think, if you are part of this wider, large group, there may also be disputes. You may have disputes amongst each other, disputes on different sets of questions. For example, how much property can an individual own? Should it be mandatory for kids to be sent to the school, or should we leave it to the discretion of the parents? Will some members of this group be allowed to discriminate some other members of this group or not? So there can be wide-ranging disputes amongst this wide, large, diverse set of people. But even then, these people are dependent upon each other. For example, you fall sick, you need to visit a doctor. You need engineers to construct roads. You need lawyers to fight your case. You need teachers to teach you on YouTube, that too for free. So people are dependent upon each other. And how can this diverse set of people live in coordination with each other, peacefully together? For that, some amount of coordination is required, cooperation is required. And how can we achieve this coordination, this cooperation, if we have rules? If all the members of this group, they agreed that there will be some basic rules that all of us will abide by. But these rules should not only be known, but these rules should be enforceable as well. For example, all the members of this group should know what are these basic rules that we all have to abide by, and it should be enforceable as well. If one member of this group violates these rules, action should be taken against those individuals. So that if all these rules are followed, it will give assurance to all the members of this group that they will be punished if they are violating these rules. That is function number 1 of the Constitution. The first function of a Constitution is to provide a set of basic rules that allow for minimal coordination amongst the members of the society. So before understanding what is a Constitution, you need to know why Constitution is required. And why Constitution is required? Because it provides, the first function of the Constitution is to provide a set of basic rules which will allow for coordination amongst the different sections of the society residing within a territory. That's function number 1. But now rules are important. The question that you should be asking is, what will be such rules? But even more important question is, who will be empowered to make these rules? Yes, we need to know what are these basic rules, because once these rules are known, they should be enforceable as well. But at the same time, the most important pressing question should be, who will make these rules? There may be X who will say, my rules are better. There may be Y who will say, no, my rules are better. Who will get to make these rules? And who gets to make these rules also varies from country to country. For example, in monarchies, where king is the ruler, king gets to make these rules. For example, in old Soviet Union, Soviet Russia, it was a single party which was given the responsibility, which was empowered to make these rules. But in modern democracies, if you will ask me who should make these rules, the answer will be people. Let the people come together, not a monarch, not a member of a political party or a political party itself, but it should be people of that country who will make rules so that all of us will abide by it. But now, as the population of a territory increases, would it be possible for all the people to come together and make these rules? And this is something that in ancient Greeks, this would happen. And that is the form of democracy that we call direct democracy, where all the people would come together in ancient Greece and decide on these basic rules that all of us should adhere to. But as the population increases, it is not possible for all the people to come together and decide and make and enact these rules. This is where people elect their representatives. And then these representatives make these rules. And these rules are basically what? These rules are laws that all of us have to abide by. In Indian Constitution, we have given this power of making rules, making laws to Parliament, or to what we call legislature. But before we decide that, it is also important to understand the second function of the Constitution. The second function is, it specifies who has the power to make decisions in a society. It decides how this government will be constituted. And we will discuss what is this government, what is legislature, what is executive, what is judiciary in our subsequent lectures as well. So job and function number 1 of the Constitution is to make basic rules which will ensure coordination amongst different sections of the society. The second function of the Constitution is to specify who has the power to make such rules, who has the power to take decisions in the society, and how this government will be constituted. But listen to me carefully. If people were angels, there was no need to impose restrictions on the people. Why? Because people are angels. Angels can do nothing wrong. So we don't need to worry about people. Why? Because they're angels. They will not usurp each other's rights. They will not snatch each other's property. They will not kill each other. They will not discriminate against each other. Why? Because they're angels. Angels can do nothing wrong. But people are not angels. So we need to govern these people. We need to have basic rules, laws put in place in a society. And every single citizen who is not an angel has to abide by these rules, has to abide by these laws, has to follow these laws. And who will make these laws? Parliament, which basically means representatives of the people. Every 5 years, people come out in large numbers, elect their representatives to Parliament, and then these representatives make laws for the entire country. So the function of the Constitution is to specify who gets to make the decisions. But at the same time, even these people, these representatives, they are not angels either. If the representatives were angels, then we need not worry, because they will not make laws which are unfair, unreasonable, unjust. They will not unnecessarily discriminate against people. So the function of the Constitution now becomes even more important. Constitution should first empower the Parliament to make laws, or empower the state to function, empower the government to be formed, and then impose limitations on this government. Why? What if tomorrow the representatives that you have elected, they start making rules or laws which say that you can't wear this shirt of this particular color, you can't wear clothes of this particular color, you can't sing this song, you can't watch this movie. This member of a society, whether it is belonging to a religious community or a caste community, they have to always serve others, and they are not allowed to inherit property. They are not allowed to buy property. They are not allowed to sell their property. Don't you think that all these rules would be unfair, unreasonable, unjust? That tells us about the third function of the Constitution, which is to set the limits of what the government can impose on its citizens. And this is where we will deviate from NCERT, and we will look at the doctrine of limited government, which primarily means that the powers available with the government, powers available with the state, these are not unlimited. There is a limitation on the powers of the state. And what are these limitations? I'll tell you one such limitation. For example, Part 3 of our Constitution, which deals with fundamental rights. What are these fundamental rights basically? These, we say, are the limitations on the state, limitations on the government. Why? Because if you read all these fundamental rights, which we will discuss in this NCERT course, it says the state shall not discriminate against its citizens on the grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth. The state shall not discriminate against its citizens when it comes to public employment, when it comes to government jobs. The state shall not deny equality. The state shall not deprive an individual of his right to life or personal liberty. The state shall not do this. The state shall not do that. Where is this mentioned? Constitution. What does it mean? Limitation on the powers of the state. Because the powers of the state are not unlimited. There is a limitation called doctrine of limited government. That is function number 3 of the Constitution, because citizens need to be protected. For example, from getting arbitrarily arrested. And what is this arbitrarily arrested? What does this phrase mean? For example, I am teaching you right now and I'm teaching for free. All the aspirants of this country can consume this content, and suddenly there is a knock at my door and the police comes and says, my dear, I'll take you to Siberia. You are under arrest. Why? Because why are you teaching civil services aspirants for free? You should have charged them. Now, what is this logic? This is arbitrary arrest without any logic, without any sense. If I would have committed murder, if I was accused of terrorism, then it was justified for the police to arrest me. But arbitrarily, without any logic, without any basis, for unnecessary things, I should not be arrested. For no reason, I should not be arrested. That is the limitation on the state, and that is function number 3 of the Constitution. Let's look at something else. Aspirations and goals of a society. We were under the colonial government. If you look at from 1757 onwards, then if you look at 1857 onwards, from 1857 we were directly controlled by the British Crown. Prior to that, we were governed by the East India Company. We had some aspirations, we had some goals. We needed liberty, liberty of thought. We needed freedom of speech and expression. We needed equality. We needed justice. But we were not given. Why? Because we were under a colonial rule, colonial government. In fact, there was a time when if an Indian judge was appointed, Indian judge could not try the Europeans. If a European had committed a crime in India, was accused of committing a crime in India, an Indian judge is not allowed to give punishment because Indians were considered inferior, lesser citizens of God, lesser mortals. But our aspirations were liberty, equality, justice, fraternity, dignity. And once we got independence, we enacted our own constitution. That constitution reflects our aspirations, our goals. And now this Constitution of India gives us liberty, equality, fraternity, dignity of an individual. But at the same time, we also need to understand that India, unfortunately, was not an equal country in a sense. That there were people who were discriminated against. There was inequality on the basis of economic status, inequality on the basis of your caste, inequality on various grounds. That inequality we had to eradicate. And we also had to overcome deprivation. That is the another job of this Constitution. The job of the Constitution is to ensure that we as a society are free from all kinds of discrimination. For example, in South Africa, there was a period of apartheid. There was racial discrimination. On the grounds of the color of your skin, you were discriminated against. But then when Nelson Mandela came out of jail, when this apartheid regime was overthrown, and then constitution was to be given to South Africa, and they made a promise, the Constitution of South Africa made a promise that we will end racial discrimination. So that inequality they had to eradicate. Similarly, in our Constitution, we had to also eradicate other forms of inequality. For example, untouchability was practiced. And that is why when Indian Constitution was enacted, Article 17 says untouchability is abolished and its practice in any form is forbidden. That is the fourth function of a constitution, to ensure that government fulfills the aspiration of the society. And the aspiration of the society was justice, liberty, eradication of inequality, ensuring equality, and ensure that we have conditions which are suitable for a just society. NCERT books also mention that perhaps the most important function of a constitution is expressing the fundamental identity of the people. And what is this fundamental identity? people came together, because previously people were various, from belonging to different sets of people, different sections of the society. They were diverse, for the lack of a better word. Now these diverse set of people who had their own identity, you are from this particular religion, you are from this particular caste, you are from this economic background, you are from this region, you speak this language, you eat this food, so you have diversity. Now all this diversity was taken away in the sense, kept at the back burner, and one single identity was given to the people, that you are an Indian. Which means that people as a collective identity came into being only through this basic constitution. That means the important function of the constitution now becomes, it gives political identity to the people. And not just political identity, moral identity as well. Moral identity in the sense, can we discriminate against our fellow citizens? Can we snatch their rights? Can we usurp their property? We can't do that. Why? Because that is something that Constitution does not allow, because that is the moral identity which Constitution creates. But when it comes to different constitutions of the world, they differ. There are some constitutions which ensure parliamentary form of democracy, where there is Prime Minister who has the real power, along with his ministers or her ministers. There are some countries which adopt for presidential form of democracy, where President has the real power. And the President is not part of the legislature. President is not part of the parliament. So different countries have different versions of the constitution. And these different constitutions create different sets of government, different forms of the government. But there are some constitutions, for example, Germany, which create a system that your identity is determined whether you are from Germany or not. In a sense, your ethnicity determines your political identity. Sir, I'm not able to understand this. Let me make it clear and let me make it simpler for you. When it comes to India, does that mean if you belong to a particular religion, only then can you be the citizen of this country? If you belong to a particular race, only then you can be part or citizen of this country? No. That means there are ethnic criterias in different parts of the world which make basis for citizenship, but not India, where everybody who is born on the soil of India, regardless of your race, caste, religion, is entitled to become the citizen of India, provided your parents also have been the citizens. And I will come back to this point in a moment, but before we do that, let's look at what is the authority of the Constitution. From where does the Constitution derive its authority from? We say Constitution is the supreme law of land, which enjoys special legal sanctity. What does that mean? Listen to me carefully. What is a constitution? How effective is a constitution? Is a constitution just? If you ask me, sir, show me the Constitution of India, I will take out a bulky book and tell you this is the Indian Constitution. There are more than 400 articles of the Constitution, 12 schedules in the Constitution, 25 parts in the Constitution. If you ask me, sir, show me the Constitution of United States, I will take out a pamphlet and tell you this is the Constitution of United States. Originally, it had 7 articles. Later on, 27 times this US Constitution got amended. But if you ask me, sir, show me the Constitution of India, show me the Constitution of United States, I will take out books and show you this is the Indian Constitution, this is the US Constitution. And we call such constitutions as written constitutions. Those constitutions which are codified into one single document. One single document, Indian Constitution. One single document, US Constitution. But if you will ask me, sir, show me the Constitution of United Kingdom, I can't refer you to a particular document or to a particular book and tell you this is the UK Constitution, because UK Constitution is unwritten. So does that mean laws are not written in Britain? Laws are written, but not all laws are written. So what does that mean? Laws are written, but they are not written and codified into a single document. They are scattered. Different documents, various different documents, all of them can be viewed as the Constitution of United Kingdom. That means all these laws have not been codified into one single document. Sir, why? Because that's how their culture works. Maybe they never felt the need that we should link, integrate all the different laws that we have and codify them into a single constitution, single document. They never felt the need. Maybe tomorrow, if they feel the need, maybe they will integrate all the different laws into a single document called the Constitution. So it depends upon what sort of constitution you have, depends upon the political culture of that particular country as well, of that particular society as well. Which means Indian Constitution is written, codified into a single document. US Constitution is written, codified into a single document. UK Constitution is not written, not codified into a single document. But now you need to ask mode of promulgation. If these are the 5 important functions of the Constitution, if we know what is the need to have the Constitution, but how do we promulgate a Constitution? Which means, how does a Constitution come into being? Who crafts this Constitution? Who wrote this Constitution? How much authority these people had? That tells us volumes about the authority of this Constitution. There are many countries where Constitution remains defunct. It is not properly enforced. It is not properly respected. It is regularly flouted. Why? Because these constitutions were basically made by the dictators or military rulers. So who promulgates the Constitution depends upon the authority of that body or the authority of that individual. But if we look at the constitutions of successful countries such as India, South Africa, United States, these constitutions have been successful. Why? Because they were crafted in the aftermath of popular nationalist movements. Indian Constitution was adopted on the 26th of November 1949. It was enacted, it entered into force on 26 January 1950. But after a massive movement against colonialism, against British colonialism by the Indian nationalist leaders. So our Constitution was the product of a nationalist movement. Similarly, in Northern America, there were 13 British colonies. Just like India was a colony of the Britain, there were 13 different British colonies in the Northern America. All of them revolted against the British Empire. That is what we call American War of Independence. And now these 13 British colonies liberated themselves and they became independent sovereign countries. Now all these independent sovereign countries, they decided to come together. They said, why can't we establish a United States of America? They assembled together at Philadelphia in United States, wrote a document called the Constitution of the United States, which was adopted in 1787, which came into force in 1789. That means the authority of a constitution depends upon who promulgates this constitution. If it is promulgated by dictators, by military juntas, then it will not have the credibility, it will run into problems. It will be defunct. But if it is the product of nationalist movements, then we see the constitutions are successful. For example, India, for example, South Africa, for example, United States. That does not mean necessarily constitution has to be the product of nationalist movements. But all those constitutions which are the product of the nationalist movements have been successful. But important point is, there are some countries which subject their constitution to a referendum. That means once this body, which is a group of people, which is tasked to write the constitution, once they write the constitution, they send it to the people. They refer it to the people. And only when the majority of the people vote in favor of this constitution, then the constitution is adopted. That gives this constitution a lot of credibility. Because although we elected our representatives who drafted this constitution, wrote this constitution, but then whatever they wrote, they subjected this document to the will of the people, to the vote of the people, through a process called referendum. And once people overwhelmingly vote in favor of this document, that constitution is adopted. But Indian constitution was never subjected to referendum. Why? Because of the credibility of the people who were part of this body which wrote this constitution. Because of the credibility of this body, which is what we call the Constituent Assembly, which we will discuss today. Constituent Assembly was set up with the single purpose of drafting the Constitution of India. It's the credibility of these people who were part of this Constituent Assembly that there was no need to subject the Indian Constitution to referendum. Even then, it enjoys the authority. Why? Because the people who adopted, who wrote, drafted this constitution, they commanded respect and authority of the people. Now imagine, there is another reason and there is another, what you can say, way by which you can get this constitution respected. If it gives everyone in the society some reason to go along with its provisions. Sir, what does that mean? If this constitution would say that the majority community in this country would dominate the minority community, will minority community accept this constitution? Minority can be linguistic minority, minority can be caste minority, minority can be religious minority, minority can be linguistic minority. Will this minority ever accept, respect this constitution? No. If this constitution privileges some members of the society as against others, will grant more privileges to some people as against others, will this constitution be abided and respected? If any group in a society feels that we are being neglected or our voice has been stifled, then they will have no reason to abide by this constitution. Which means then the other way in which we can ensure that constitution is respected, constitution has the authority, it commands the authority, is if the constitution preserves the freedom of every single individual within this community, preserves the equality of every single citizen residing, inhabiting this country. So what are the 5 functions of the constitution? Done. Why constitution and how constitution is an authoritative document, gets the authority, commands its authority, we have discussed. Constitution can be written, constitution can be unwritten. But at the same time, we need a balanced institutional design. We say constitutions, they're often subverted. they're often manipulated not by people, but by a small group of people who wish to enhance their power. That means there will be some people who will try and misuse the provisions of the Constitution because they want to stick to the power. So Constitution gets subverted not by the people, but by a small group of people who want to preserve, enhance their power. Now, how do we solve this problem? We need checks. How do we solve this problem? Something called separation of powers. If you accumulate all the powers, whether lawmaking powers, implementation powers, judicial powers, in one body or individual, it is the worst example of tyranny. Sir, what are you saying? I am saying, if I have the power to make laws, if I have the power to make rules, if I have the power to implement rules as well, and I have the power to punish those who are violating these rules as well, I become the judge, jury, and the executioner. You should never give one body or one individual all these powers. That is why we should go for separation of powers. That is why the powers of the state are separated. There is one body called the legislature whose principal function is to legislate, to make laws. There is another organ called the executive whose principal objective is to implement laws. And then there is a third organ which is created called the judiciary, whose principal objective is to provide justice to the people. For example, members of the parliament will make laws, but Prime Minister and his ministers will implement laws. And the judiciary will look into whether what happened in Kolkata, whether the police did its job or not, whether the government did its job properly or not, whether there was a cover-up or not. And that is how you impose checks on each other. So if the legislature is making a rule, making a law which is unfair, unjust, unreasonable, judiciary will strike down that law. Because the power is given to the judiciary called judicial review. The judiciary can review every action of the legislature, of the executive. If the Prime Minister or his Council of Ministers, they are unable to do their job properly, they are violating the Constitution, they can be removed by the legislature. So how this Constitution we have to ensure is not subverted is by looking at the institutional design of this Constitution. And that institutional design is create legislature, create executive, create judiciary. And it is argued, advocated for the first time by French philosopher Montesquieu, who called for separation of powers. But apart from separation of powers, there should be checks and balances so that one organ keeps a check on the other organ, so that they don't encroach upon each other, so that they do not violate this Constitution. And our Indian Constitution horizontally fragments this power across different institutions like legislature, executive, judiciary, and there are even independent bodies such as Election Commission. Although NCERT calls Election Commission a statutory body, but from the UPSC standpoint, it's not a statutory body, although it's not a wrong term to use, because statutory body means a body created by a law. Election Commission is a body created by law, but that law is the Constitution. So Election Commission is a constitutional body. Finance Commission is a constitutional body. UPSC is a constitutional body. CAG is a constitutional body. But then there are bodies which are created not by the Constitution, but by the act of the Parliament, by the law passed by the Parliament. Those are what we call statutory bodies. For example, National Human Rights Commission, National Commission for Minorities. All these are statutory bodies. And then at the same time, Constitution should not be too rigid. Once you have made the Constitution, it should not be so flexible that you can change it at any point in time. Then there will be no clarity amongst the people. They would think that this is a Constitution today, tomorrow it might change. Because you are giving too flexibility to the Parliament to change this Constitution. But it should not be so rigid that you can never change it. You need to change it. Why? Because Constitution has to be a living document. That we will discuss in one of the chapters of the NCERT, Constitution as a living document, but very briefly here. Pandit Nehru said in the Constituent Assembly that Constitution, every genuine demand of the people should be capable of realization. When I told you our Constitution is a document of people's faith, people's aspirations, aspirations keep on changing. What people aspired for in 1950 may not have been the aspiration of the people of India in 1970s or 80s or 90s, may not be the aspiration of the people of India in 2024, and clearly will not be the aspiration of the people of India in 2030, 2040, 2050. So this Constitution, which reflects the aspirations of the people, should also change to reflect the changing aspirations of the people. That is what Pandit Nehru said. Any genuine demand should be capable of realization. Dr. Ambedkar further said, it is not possible that 100% of the people in India would be satisfied with the Constitution I have framed, I have drafted. Because you can't satisfy 100% of the people. But if you're not satisfied with the Constitution, get 2/3 majority in the Parliament and change the Constitution. Because once the Constitution has been adopted, when it has come into force, when it has been enacted, then this Parliament, to which people elect representatives every 5 years, that means this Parliament is the representative of the people of this country. If this Parliament feels, if 2/3 of this Parliament feels that we don't agree with this Constitution, change it. So if you are dissatisfied with this Constitution, says Dr. Ambedkar, then all you need to do, get 2/3 majority in the Parliament and change the Constitution. If you can't get 2/3 majority, then I can assume that only you are dissatisfied with the Constitution. Your dissatisfaction is not shared by the larger, wider majority public. So Constitution should not be too flexible, because if it is too flexible, then it will give no predictability to the people. It should not be too rigid, that it cannot be changed at all. It has to be somewhere in the between. A fine balance has to be made. But how was the Indian Constitution made? Indian Constitution was made by, as I said, the Constituent Assembly, a group of people whose primary objective was to draft the Constitution for the newly independent country. And this Constituent Assembly met for the first time on the 9th of December 1946. But this was for an undivided India. Because in 1946, the country was not partitioned. And at that time, the colonial India or the British India consists of provincial legislative assemblies, provinces. And these provincial legislative assemblies, you might have read in modern history, they were set up under the Government of India Act 1935. So there were provincial legislative assemblies in provinces, but then there were more than 500 princely states as well. Some reports say 562 odd princely states. So there would be representatives of the provinces, there will be representatives of the princely states as well, in proportion to their population. And we don't have to get too deep into detail how these people were elected or nominated. But just keep in mind constitution was made by the Constituent Assembly, which had the representatives from the entire country, from provinces, from princely states as well. But this was for undivided India. But then 3rd of June 1947, the partition plan was accepted, which means now it was sure that country would be partitioned into India and Pakistan, unfortunately on the religious grounds. And then the remaining Constituent Assembly, whose number was then reduced to 299, because previously the number had 292 members from the provinces, close to 93 members from princely states, which would include those areas which came under Pakistan later on. So the total number of the members of the Constituent Assembly got reduced to 299. And the constitution was adopted on the 26th of November 1949, when 284 members were present and they signed it. But constitution came into force on 26th January 1950. Why this mismatch? Although not mentioned in NCERT, but let me tell you. Indian National Congress, which was fighting for India's independence, it was not always fighting for independence. Initially, the objective of the Congress Party was that we should get more representation in the provincial legislative assemblies, in the legislative councils first. That more and more Indians should be involved in making laws for India. More and more Indians should be able to apply for the Civil Services exams in India. So originally, their demand was self-rule. That's when Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lokmanya Tilak said, Swaraj is my birthright and I must have it. He was not referring to independence. He was referring to self-rule. That means we will be under the control of the crown, British crown, but we want to make laws for our people on our own. But we will remain under the crown. We will remain with the crown. The sovereignty will lie with the crown. But we want to make laws for our own people. That's what Annie Besant also asked for. So basically, the Congress leaders were asking for a dominion status. We don't need complete independence, but we want Indians to be elected to legislature. They should make laws for the people of this country, but we will remain under the British crown. Then there was a left-wing shift in the Indian National Congress with the emergence of young leaders who were radically left. For example, Pandit Nehru. For example, Subhash Chandra Bose. And in 1928, they said, we will give you 1 year. If you can't convince the British to grant dominion status to India in 1 year, then after that, we will not listen to you. Then our goal will not be dominion status. Our goal will not be Swaraj or self-rule. Our goal will be Purna Swaraj, complete independence. And British naturally did not agree for dominion status in 1928. Then a historic session of Indian National Congress was conducted on the banks of the river Ravi in Lahore, which was presided over by Pandit Nehru, where a resolution was passed by the Congress asking for complete independence, Purna Swaraj. And a resolution was also passed that we shall celebrate Independence Day. It was a symbolic gesture. Although we were not given independence, but symbolically we wanted to feel that we are free. On 26th of January 1930, for the first time, Independence Day was celebrated. The national flag was hoisted. So when this Constitution of India was ready, adopted on 26th November 1949, Pandit Nehru made a plea, made a request that we should implement, we should give force to this constitution, we should enact this constitution on the 26th of January 1950, so that this 26th January is etched into the memories of all Indians. And that is how even today we are talking about 26th January. What happened on 26th January 1930 when for the first time Independence Day was celebrated? that despite the fact that our constitution was enacted in 1950, was the product of the nationalist movement, but who made this constitution? A constituent assembly, which got split also because the country was partitioned. Pakistan became an Islamic Pakistan, but India did not become a Hindu Pakistan. Because in India, the constitution committed to a new conception of citizenship, where not only would minorities be secure, but whatever your religion is, whatever your religious identity is, that will have no bearing on citizenship rights. In a sense, just people from a particular religion would be empowered, would be allowed to become the citizens of India. That will not be the case, because religion will not be used as a qualification for getting citizenship. And this Constituent Assembly was also diverse. Diverse in the sense, members of all religions were given representation. Assembly had 28 members from the scheduled caste. In fact, majority of the members, close to 82% of the members, were from Congress. But Congress was representing a diverse set of people. So within that umbrella, Congress accepted and managed to accommodate all shades of opinion with it. And the best part about Constituent Assembly was its insistence on deliberation. Every single article, every single provision of the Constitution was thoroughly debated. Everything was debated. There were disagreements, but even then there was deliberation. There were differences, but even then there was deliberation. There were differences as to what should be the name of this country. There were differences as to whether we should give more powers to the states or more power to the center. There were differences as to what should be the relationship between legislature and executive. There were differences as to what should be the powers of the judiciary. There were differences, but even then there was deliberation, and everything was thoroughly debated and then voted upon, except one. One provision was virtually passed in the Constitution without any debate. And what was it? Universal adult suffrage. All the citizens of India above the age of 21, they will have the right to vote. Later in 1989, this voting age was reduced from 21 to 18. But at the time of the commencement of the Constitution, the voting age was 21. Universal adult suffrage. In one fell swoop, women were given voting rights, not discriminated against as compared to men. Poor people had equal voting rights as compared to rich. The amount of property that you acquire, hold, the amount of knowledge that you have, the number of degrees that you have, the educational qualification will not determine your voting rights. Every single Indian who is an adult, who has crossed the age of 21, will have the right to vote. And this was remarkable. Because United States gave voting rights to women in 1920. Britain gave voting rights to women in 1928. Some women in earlier, but all the women in 1928. Switzerland in close to 1970s. But India in one fell swoop, once and for all, in 1950. Every single provision was debated, thoroughly debated. There were also major committees. For example, if we have a government at the center, but not everything can be, although can be, but just for the division of labor and for better output of the work, not everything can be given to Mr. Modi. He will allocate portfolios. You take care of home, you take care of external affairs, you take care of defense, you take care of agriculture, you take care of finance, if you can. Similarly, if the constitution of this entire country, a bulky constitution, was to be made, then for that various committees were set up. And most of these committees, for example, 8 major committees on different subjects were set up. For example, Committee on the Powers of the Union, Committee on Fundamental Rights, so on and so forth. Most of these committees were headed by either Pandit Nehru or Sardar Patel or Dr. Ambedkar or Dr. Rajendra Prasad. The names: Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Sardar Patel, Pandit Nehru, B.R. Ambedkar. All of them had differences with each other. Sardar Patel and Pandit Nehru sometimes did not agree to each other. Even after Mr. Rajendra Prasad became the president, Pandit Nehru became the prime minister, they did not agree with each other on numerous occasions. Particularly when Dr. Rajendra Prasad went to inaugurate the Somnath temple in Gujarat. Pandit Nehru said, you should not do that because we are a secular state where the state does not have any religion. Dr. Rajendra Prasad still went ahead and inaugurated the Somnath temple. Pandit Nehru had a point. He said, President, who is the head of the executive, should not mix religion and politics together. And this led Pandit Nehru make a famous statement wherein he said, the dams are the modern temples of India. So they disagreed with each other. Mr. Ambedkar disagreed with Mahatma Gandhi as well. But even then, they reasoned with each other, debated thoroughly, discussed everything through consensus, and wherever not possible through voting, enacted this beautiful constitution which we have in front of us. And the reason for that is we inherited the spirit of the nationalist movement. Because constitution is not the product of only the group of people who produce it. Not the product of the Constituent Assembly which produces this constitution. The struggles which we had to make, the sacrifices that we had to make during the nationalist movement, that provided a guiding light to the constitution. And one such is Objectives Resolution that was introduced by Pandit Nehru in the Constituent Assembly in 1946, and finally it was adopted by the Constituent Assembly on the 22nd of January 1947. Objectives Resolution. What is the objective that we want to achieve through this constitution? By drafting this constitution, by writing this constitution, what do we want to achieve? What we want to achieve? Equality, liberty, democracy, sovereignty, and a cosmopolitan identity. This resolution was moved by Pandit Nehru, that it is this resolution which should guide the Constituent Assembly in making this constitution. And this Objectives Resolution later on became preamble of the Indian Constitution. With some modifications, of course. So the basic principle is that the government must be democratic, elected by the people, removed by the people, and committed to the welfare of the people. And the Constituent Assembly spent a lot of time on how can we evolve the right balance between legislature, executive, and judiciary. What are we discussing? Constitution. Why and how? What are the 5 principal functions of a constitution? What is a constitution? Why do we need it? Then from what does our constitution derive its authority from? What gives credibility to our Constitution? Written, unwritten. And we also looked at the role of the Constituent Assembly. But if the purpose of the Constituent Assembly was to draft the Constitution, write the Constitution, then they also had to decide what should be the right balance between legislature, executive and judiciary. And the beauty here is, these members of the Constituent Assembly, they did not shy away. They did not hesitate to learn from the experiment and experiences of other countries. The framers of our Constitution, they were not parochial. That why should we embrace the best practices, best provisions from other constitutions of the world? No, we will make our own Constitution without looking at what is working where in other parts of the country. Although some people say that Indian Constitution is a bag of borrowings. We have borrowed provisions from different constitutions of the world. But herein lies the beauty, that those who were the members of the Constituent Assembly, they were not parochial. They were not hesitant to learn from others. They looked at the best practices from different parts of the country, but then adapted these provisions to suit India's needs and aspirations. So we can say that India was extremely lucky to have an assembly that, instead of being parochial in its outlook, could take the best available everywhere in the world and make it their own. And look at this beautiful statement from the Constituent Assembly debates by Dr. Ambedkar on the 4th of November 1948. And read this with me. Dr. Ambedkar, one likes to ask whether there can be anything new in a constitution framed at this hour in the history of the world. The only new things, if there can be any, in a constitution framed so late in a day are the variations made to remove the faults and to accommodate it to the needs of the country. So there will be some provisions in different parts of the country, in different parts of the world, which may be faulty, but we will remove those variations, remove those faults and adopt them to Indian needs, aspirations. This is something new that can be there in the Indian Constitution. Otherwise, there can't be anything new, because our Constitution is formed so late in the day in 1950. But what have we borrowed from other constitutions of the world? For example, from Irish Constitution, we borrowed directive principles of the state policy. From French Constitution, from the French Revolution, we borrowed the principles of liberty, equality, fraternity. From British Constitution, first past the post. And what is this first past the post? If elections are conducted from this constituency and there are 10 candidates contesting the election, who will be the winner? Somebody who gets majority? Majority means more than 50%. Or somebody who gets the highest number of votes? Somebody who gets the highest number of votes. That is what we call first past the post system. That is something that we find in Britain. Parliamentary form of democracy, where the real power is with the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. The idea of the rule of law, which we will discuss in our subsequent lectures. Institution of the Speaker. Although in Britain they have a concept called once a speaker, always a speaker, but we have not adopted that feature in India. But the role of the Speaker in presiding over Lok Sabha, that we have borrowed from the Britain. Law-making procedure. From Canadian Constitution, a quasi-federal form of government. A government where centre is more powerful as against the states. Residual powers. Residual powers in the sense, there is distribution of powers under Schedule 7 of the Constitution, where Constitution divides powers into 3 lists. Union list, state list, concurrent list. For example, union list, defense, external affairs, communication, banking, insurance. Who has the power to make laws on these subjects? Parliament. Law and order, land, agriculture, police, gambling. Who has the power to make laws on these provisions? State legislature. Who has the power to make laws on education, forests, criminal procedure, civil procedure? Both center as well as state legislatures, because these are the items mentioned in the concurrent list. What if there is something which is not mentioned in any of these three lists? We call it residue. Such powers in United States are with the states. Residuary powers are with the states. But in India, residuary powers are with the center. Just like Canada. Similarly, United States, we have the Charter of Fundamental Rights, because just like they have Bill of Rights, we also have Part 3 of the Constitution, which details a list of fundamental rights that we have. 6 sets of fundamental rights. Right to equality from Articles 14 to 18. Right to freedom, Articles 19 to 22. Right against exploitation, Articles 23 and 24. Right to religious freedom, Articles 25 to 28. Cultural and educational rights under Articles 29 and 30. Right to constitutional remedies under Article 32. Similarly, the power of the judicial review. Judiciary will have the power to review all acts of the legislature, all actions of the executive. And how can our constitution ensure that judiciary is independent? It's not under the influence of the executive, not under the influence of the legislature. That is something that we have borrowed from the Constitution of United States of America. This covers and completes Chapter 1, Constitution. Why and how? Now let's do one exercise and see if you can answer all these questions. This question was asked in Prelims 2023. Which one of the following statements best reflects the chief purpose of the Constitution of a country? It determines the objective for making of necessary laws. It enables the creation of political offices and a government. It defines and limits the powers of the government. It secures social justice, social equality, social security. You may think that all of this is right, but all of the above is not the option. Then reread the question. Which one of the following statements best reflects the chief purpose of the Constitution? Doctrine of limited government. The government should be limited in its power. First, we should create a government, empower it, then impose limitations on the government. So it defines the limits. It defines and limits the powers of the government. That is the chief purpose of the Constitution of a country. Question number 2. A constitutional government by definition is government by legislature, popular government, multi-party government, limited government. Because doctrine of limited government means that Constitution will impose limitations on the powers of the state. So a constitutional government is a limited government. Another question. Consider the following statements. A constitutional government is one. This is how the questions may also get repeated. Which places effective restrictions on individual liberty in the interest of the state authority. Places effective restrictions on the authority of the state in the interest of the individual liberty. Constitutional government. Did we discuss in this lecture that we need to restrict the powers or impose limitations on the liberty, fundamental rights of the people in the interest of the state authority? We did not. But did we discuss that fundamental rights are limitations on the powers of the state? Don't deprive an individual of his right to life and personal liberty. So constitutional government is one which places restrictions on the authority of the state. Why? So that the individual liberty of individual citizens is justified, is ensured. So first one is wrong, second one is right, B, 2 only is the right answer. This is about chapter 1 of our Constitution at Work. a textbook in political science for class 11th. We'll meet tomorrow, 6 p.m. again with chapter 2 of this beautiful textbook. I'll see you tomorrow. But till then, do not forget to like this video, drop in your comments, tell me your inaugural thoughts on how did you like this first session, and see you tomorrow, 6 o'clock in the evening. Till then, have a great time. All the best. Bye-bye. Stay safe.